Something just happened that nobody in the basketball world saw coming. And when the dust finally settles on this moment, historians, analysts, and fans are going to look back and point to this exact day as the moment women's basketball was permanently split into two eras, before and after. Because what just went down is not a rumor making its rounds on social media. It is not some clickbait headline designed to get a reaction. What just happened is real. It is documented, and it is absolutely earth-shattering in every sense of the word. Caitlin Clark, the woman who single-handedly dragged women's basketball into the mainstream spotlight, the player who filled arenas that used to be half empty, the rookie who made Fortune 500 companies suddenly care about the WNBA, has reached her absolute limit. After weeks of enduring something that can only be described as one of the most baffling, infuriating, and frankly disgraceful coaching situations in the history of professional sports, she has made a decision, a massive, career-defining, league-altering decision. And the people who handed her that decision on a silver platter just went on national television and made sure the entire world knew exactly why. So buckle in, because this story has betrayal, ego, money, power, and one of the most ruthless public call-outs professional sports has ever witnessed. And by the time we get to the end of it, you are going to understand exactly how one coach's fragile ego may have just destroyed an entire franchise and handed a brand new league the greatest gift in the history of women's basketball. To understand how we got here, you have to understand what has been quietly building inside the Indiana Fever organization for weeks, because this did not happen overnight. This was a slow, grinding, maddening deterioration that started the moment head coach Stephanie White made a decision so tactically baffling, so strategically indefensible, that coaches and analysts across the country couldn't believe what they were watching. She took the ball out of Caitlin Clark's hands. Not because Clark was playing poorly, not because the numbers suggested a different approach, but because somewhere inside Stephanie White's basketball philosophy, she convinced herself that the best offensive strategy available to the Indiana Fever, a team that had struggled for years before Clark arrived, was to reduce the greatest point guard in women's basketball to a corner decoy, a decoration, a name on a jersey standing 20 feet from the basket while someone else ran the offense. And here is the part that made fans absolutely lose their minds. The person who ended up running the offense in Clark's place was Aaliyah Boston, a center. A center was bringing the ball up the floor more than Caitlin Clark, more than Kelsey Mitchell, more than anyone. A player whose natural position is in the paint, in the post, fighting for rebounds and creating havoc in the interior. That player was acting as the team's primary ball handler, while the best playmaking guard in the sport stood in the corner watching. The reaction online was immediate and volcanic. Fans who had followed the Fever all season, who had packed into arenas specifically to watch Clark orchestrate, couldn't process what they were seeing. One widely shared post summed it up perfectly. When you have the best point guard on your team playing like a shooting guard and you're not even drawing up plays for her, what exactly is the strategy? What product are you selling? Because it isn't basketball, not any version of basketball that makes any sense. And the answer, as painful as it is to say, seems to have had very little to do with basketball at all. Because Clark is a rhythm player. Everyone who has watched her knows this. She needs to be in the flow of the game, touching the ball, making decisions, pushing pace. That is when she is at her most devastating. Shove her into a corner, take away her decision-making role, and you are not just limiting her, you are deliberately kneecapping your own offense. And if you do that knowing full well how she plays, knowing what she needs to operate at her highest level, then you have to ask yourself a very uncomfortable question about what the real motivation actually was.
The conclusion that fans, analysts, and now even players from other organizations have landed on is one that nobody inside the WNBA wanted to say out loud for a very long time. But the silence is officially over. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment, because the financial reality of Caitlin Clark's situation inside the WNBA is genuinely one of the most jaw-dropping imbalances in the history of professional sports. And when you lay the numbers out side by side, the picture that emerges is almost impossible to believe. Caitlin Clark is reportedly earning somewhere in the range of $75,000 for the WNBA season. $75,000 for the player who has done more for the financial growth of women's professional basketball in 12 months than the league managed to accomplish in the previous decade combined. Think about what that number looks like against the backdrop of what she has actually generated. Arenas across the country have had to physically move to larger venues just to accommodate the crowds that show up specifically to watch number 22. Television ratings for games featuring Clark have shattered records that stood for years. Sponsors who had never previously considered putting their brand behind women's basketball started writing massive checks the moment Clark became a household name. The ripple effect of her presence in this league has been felt in ticket sales, merchandise, broadcast deals, and the general cultural conversation around women's sports. And she was earning $75,000. The absurdity of that gap between what she generates and what she takes home has been an open secret in basketball circles for months. But what changed recently is that players started saying it out loud. Napheesa Collier, one of the most respected players in the WNBA and someone who has never had a reputation for controversy or drama, looked directly into a camera and acknowledged what everyone already knew. Clark's impact on this league is undeniable. It is unprecedented, and the compensation structure surrounding her makes absolutely no sense given the revenue she produces. That kind of statement, coming from a player of Collier's credibility, carries enormous weight. It is not a hot take from an outside commentator. It is a decorated professional athlete, someone who has earned everything she has in this league, saying plainly that the system is broken and that the woman being most visibly failed by that system deserves better. And better, as it turns out, is exactly what was about to be offered. Brianna Stewart and Napheesa Collier did not build the Unrivaled league by accident. They built it because they saw a problem in women's basketball that nobody with actual power seemed interested in solving. The fact that elite WNBA players had nowhere meaningful to play during the off-season except overseas, far from their families, far from their fan bases, grinding through grueling seasons in foreign leagues just to stay competitive and earn a living wage. So they created an alternative, a domestic option, a league built specifically around the idea that the best women's basketball players in the world deserved a professional product that reflected their actual value.
The Unrivaled League plays in Miami over the 6-week window. It has already locked up 26 of its 30 players. It has signed a media rights deal with TNT Sports that reportedly covers 45-plus primetime games over 6 seasons and could be worth north of $100 million. That is not a hobby project. That is not a vanity league propped up by celebrity money. That is a real, structured, professionally operated basketball league with legitimate television infrastructure behind it. And for months, one name had been conspicuously absent from the Unrivaled roster: Caitlin Clark. Throughout the entire WNBA season, speculation had been swirling about whether Clark would eventually sign with Unrivaled. The league had been announcing players steadily for 3 months, building its roster piece by piece, and each announcement came with the quiet but unmistakable question hanging in the background: is Clark next? Is she in? Because make no mistake, the executives at Unrivaled understood exactly what having Clark's name on that roster would mean for their young league. Not just for viewership, not just for ticket sales, but for the entire narrative around what Unrivaled was trying to become. A league without Caitlin Clark was a strong league. A league with Caitlin Clark was a phenomenon. And then the situation in Indiana started deteriorating in a very public, very ugly way, and Stewart and Collier started paying very close attention. According to reports from sources close to the situation, what happened next was not a slow, carefully negotiated courtship played out over weeks of back-and-forth conversations. It was direct, it was aggressive, and it was designed to make Clark feel something she had not felt in a very long time inside the Indiana Fever organization: genuinely wanted.
Brianna Stewart and Napheesa Collier reportedly reached out to Caitlin Clark personally, not through intermediaries, not through layers of agents and representatives exchanging carefully worded emails. They called her. And what they put on the table was an offer that went far beyond anything the WNBA salary structure was ever going to be able to match. A fully guaranteed multi-million-dollar contract, ownership equity in the league itself, meaning Clark would not just be a player but a stakeholder, someone with a financial stake in the very product she was helping to build. Complete creative and tactical freedom over her offensive role, meaning no coach would ever again be able to shove her into a corner while a center ran the point. And perhaps most significantly, a promise, a direct, explicit promise that the coaching staff surrounding her would be built around respect, around her strengths, and around actually letting her play the basketball that made her the most talked about player in the sport. For context, this offer needs to be placed alongside the one Ice Cube extended before the Big Three season. Ice Cube, who has built a reputation for making bold, aggressive swings when he sees an opportunity, made what was reported to be a substantial offer to bring Clark into the Big Three format. The fact that Unrivaled's offer is being benchmarked against that one tells you everything about the financial territory being discussed. This is not a modest lifestyle upgrade. This is a number that makes the $75,000 WNBA salary look almost insulting by comparison.
And reportedly, Caitlin Clark did not need a long time to take it over. But the offer itself was only the beginning of this story. Because Stewart and Collier were not content simply to sign their prize acquisition and quietly move on. They had watched what happened in Indiana. They had seen how Clark was treated, and they decided that the basketball world deserved to know exactly what they thought about it. What followed was one of the most remarkable press conferences in the recent history of women's sports, because when Brianna Stewart and Napheesa Collier stepped up to those microphones, they did not come with polished PR talking points carefully vetted by a communications team. They came with something far more potent, the truth, delivered without apology, without softening, and without any apparent concern for the feelings of the people on the receiving end. Stewart reportedly looked directly into the cameras and said what thousands of fans had been screaming into the void for weeks, that what happened in Indiana was a disgrace, that having a generational, once-in-a-lifetime point guard and choosing to remove her from the offense because of personal insecurities is not a coaching philosophy. It is a failure of basic professional responsibility. The word she reportedly used was pathetic, and she was not done. Collier followed up with language that was even more direct. The substance of what she said, according to reports, was unambiguous. Stephanie White deliberately sabotaged her own team to serve her ego. The WNBA failed to step in and protect its most important player, and the Unrivaled league had now done what the league itself refused to do. They protected her. Let that sink in for a moment. Two of the most respected active players in women's basketball stood on a national platform and told the world, with their names and faces attached, that the coaching of the Indiana Fever was not just bad, it was deliberate sabotage. That the league that employs Stephanie White failed its most valuable asset, and that a brand new organization with a 6-week season and a TV deal that hasn't fully played out yet was more capable of taking care of Caitlin Clark than the franchise that drafted her first overall. The internet did not process this calmly. Fan accounts, media personalities, analysts, and casual observers who had been watching the Indiana situation with growing frustration found themselves looking at each other and saying, "Did that actually just happen? Did two active players just go on television and publicly dismantle a sitting head coach's entire professional reputation?" Yes, they absolutely did. And the reaction inside the Indiana Fever facility was by all accounts catastrophic. When the footage of that press conference started circulating and the details of the contract offer became public knowledge, the Indiana Fever organization reportedly descended into a state of complete internal chaos. The kind of chaos that does not get resolved with a carefully worded team statement or a behind-closed-doors conversation.
the kind that fundamentally changes the trajectory of a franchise. Stephanie White, according to people inside the facility, was not handling it well. The reports that emerged paint a picture of a coach who had spent weeks operating with absolute certainty that her decisions were correct, that her authority was unquestioned, that her approach to managing the most famous player in the sport was somehow defensible, and who was now watching that certainty evaporate in real time on national television. She reportedly broke down entirely, hyperventilating, in tears, frantically making calls to the front office, looking for support, looking for someone to help her navigate what had just unfolded.
The support reportedly was not coming because the Indiana Fever front office had its own catastrophic problem to manage. Owners who had watched Clark transform their franchise from an afterthought into a genuine cultural moment were now staring at the possibility that she was gone. Not just gone for a season, gone in a way that sent a message to every player in the league about what happens when an organization fails to protect its most important asset. The WNBA front office was reportedly no calmer. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, who has spent the better part of a year carefully navigating the politics of the Clark era without ever fully committing to acknowledging how singular her impact has been, was now facing the nightmare scenario. Because the television partners who signed big contracts did not sign them to watch a hollow product. The Fortune 500 sponsors who wrote massive checks did not write them for a version of the Fever that had chased its star out the door, and the fans who were canceling season tickets by the thousands were not doing so quietly. The financial architecture that had been carefully constructed around Clark's presence in the WNBA suddenly looked very fragile, because the whole thing, every brick of it, had been built with the assumption that she would be there. Here is where the story gets genuinely complicated, because underneath all of the drama, the press conferences, the contract figures, and the very public institutional meltdown, there is a real human being at the center of all of this, who has just survived one of the most intense debut seasons any professional athlete has experienced in recent memory. Caitlin Clark did not just deal with difficult coaching this season, she dealt with all of it simultaneously. The physical punishment on the court, the flagrant contact, the double teams, the face guarding, the specific and very deliberate targeting that comes when opponents decide that the best strategy against you is to make you as uncomfortable as possible on every single possession. That alone would have broken most players. But she also carried everything that existed off the court. The media circus that follows her to every city, the narrative battles that have been fought on her behalf and against her in equal measure, the pressure of representing something much larger than a basketball team, an entire argument about the value of women's sports, about whether the investment is real, about whether the product can sustain the attention it has earned. That weight does not disappear when the final buzzer sounds. It follows you home. It follows you into the off-season. So the question that serious basketball people are genuinely wrestling with right now is not just whether the Unrivaled contract is financially compelling. It obviously is. It is whether this particular moment, right after an emotionally and physically draining season, right after a very public and very painful coaching situation, is the right time to step directly into another league that is still finding its footing. Unrivaled has real infrastructure, it has a real television deal, it has Stewart and Collier who are legitimate basketball people with real credibility and genuine good intentions for the sport. But it is still a 6-year-old idea in its first season of existence, and the noise that surrounded Clark in the WNBA, the divisive fan bases, the media narratives, the tribal arguments that attach themselves to everything she did, there is no guarantee that noise disappears when she walks through Unrivaled's doors. In fact, there is a reasonable argument that the noise gets louder.
What happens if Unrivaled's viewership goals, which are tied, according to at least one unconfirmed report, to the value of that TNT deal, are not met in year one? What happens if the product, which is still being introduced to a casual sports audience, takes longer to find its audience than the league needs it to?
Does Clark become the scapegoat for expectations that were never hers to carry in the first place? She has been in that position before, very recently, and it was not a comfortable place to be. None of this means the Unrivaled deal is wrong. It might be exactly right, but it is worth understanding the full landscape before arriving at a conclusion. Step back from the individual names for a moment. Step back from Stephanie White's decisions, from the specific contract figures, from the press conference language and the locker room tears. Step back and look at what this moment actually represents, because it is larger than any one player, any one coach, or any one franchise. What just happened is a demonstration of power, real economic, market-driven power. For the first time in the history of women's professional basketball, a player's individual value is so undeniable, so empirically verifiable, so impossible to argue with, that competing organizations are willing to build entire recruiting strategies around a single signature. That has never happened before, not like this. The WNBA was built on a model where players were grateful for the opportunity, where the league itself was the draw and the players were interchangeable parts within it, where no individual athlete could ever credibly threaten to leave and take meaningful revenue with them, because the assumption was always that the league would survive and the player would be replaced. Caitlin Clark just broke that assumption into pieces. Because when Brianna Stewart and Napheesa Collier picked up the phone and made that call, they were not doing it out of charity. They were doing it because the math made it obvious. Clark's presence in a league is worth so much in media attention, in sponsorship dollars, in casual viewership, in cultural relevance, that the investment pays for itself before she scores a single basket. She is not just a basketball player at this point. She is infrastructure. She is a television deal. She is a reason for sponsors to sign. She is the difference between a league being discussed and a league being ignored. And the Indiana Fever, guided by a coach who apparently decided that managing her own ego was more important than managing that reality, just handed all of that to someone else.
Stephanie White did not just lose some games. She did not just make some questionable tactical decisions that a new assistant coach and an off-season adjustment period might fix. According to everything that has been reported, she made a decision, a sustained, deliberate decision to sideline the most valuable player in her sport. And the consequences of that decision are now playing out on a national stage in real time for the entire basketball world to witness. The WNBA will survive this. It has survived difficult moments before, and it will survive this one. But the league's relationship with its own star, its willingness to protect her, its capacity to ensure that the environment surrounding her reflects her actual value, all of that is now under a microscope. And every answer the league gives over the coming weeks will tell you exactly what kind of organization it actually wants to be. As for Caitlin Clark, she walked into the WNBA as a rookie who is going to have to prove herself on someone else's terms. She is walking out of this moment on her own terms, with a multi-million-dollar offer on the table, with two of the sport's most respected players vouching for her value, and with the entire basketball world waiting to see what she decides. The game changed, and the woman who changed it is just getting started.